Welcome to the video series on natural resources. This is meant to help middle school students pass content assessments in Summit Platform for Science. But even if you're not a middle school student in Summit Platform, this could be useful for you if you're trying to learn about the topics that I'm going to be covering in this video, which is what are the resources that we rely on to survive as humans? What do we take from the ecosystems of the planet? And which ones of those are renewable? And which one of those are non-renewable? And there are even some which are called inexhaustible, which we can't possibly use all of it. But what are those interactions, and how is it that we have to be careful to manage the use of that in a sustainable way so that we always have it for the future? So let's start by talking about two objectives at once, because they're so connected that it's kind of hard to talk about them separately, which is the idea that we depend on resources from the land, the ocean, the air, and the biosphere, and that these resources may or may not be limited and may or not be possible to be renewed themselves in the course of a human lifetime. So as we discuss each thing that we use, I'm going to be talking about if they're renewable or not, and I'll automatically do both objectives in one video. Now, natural resources are basically anything that we take from any of the spheres of the earth. So we also obviously need oxygen from the air, right? Plants need carbon dioxide from the air, but we need also things from the geosphere. Minerals, elements, chemicals that we mine and take from the geosphere to make products for industrial applications, which help support all the luxuries that we have developed in modern technology. And also, of course, for construction purposes, all of that. Then there's also resources we take from the biosphere, all right? We need food from life. We also need resources like animals. There's so many things we use animals for, right? Whether it's for to make clothing, medicine from animals and plants. Then there's also, of course, things that we need from the hydrosphere. We need water, right? We need fresh water in order to do so much. And let's talk about all of that. But in general, the idea of natural resources is that anything that you need to take from the natural world for human consumption and use in order to support life. Now, do note, I'm going to start right from the bat and say that one of the major reasons why the ecosystems of the world are all collapsing is because we have so many people, overpopulation, that the amount that we have to take is way too much for the ecosystem to manage. So it's called over-exploitation of ecosystems. And on top of that, we also pollute the ecosystems. We destroy forests by deforestation. And all of it together causes fragmentation and destruction of ecosystems that lowers the biodiversity of the planet and makes it less likely for us to survive. So as I talk about the things that we need, let's make sure that we be conscientious that the more that we use, the more impact we will have and the less we'll have for the future. So, which takes us to the idea of sustainable use. That is using the earth in a way that allows us to have it tomorrow. That must require us to give us a chance to recover as opposed to just deplete it without concern. The best way to do that is with the famous reduce, reuse, and recycle. Use less is the primary thing that you can do. Americans use dozens of times more resources and energy than other people on the planet. And because of that, we have an enormous footprint. But everybody else in the world wants to live that way, live like a first world country. And because of that, as we have more and more people on the planet, it's becoming a problem. We all have to take our part. And Americans certainly can do a lot. Luxuries that we don't really need, the trash that we produce, buying a new TV, a new video game set every year, new clothes every week. Think about how much you're using and really think about do I really need this? Reduce as much as possible. Then instead of throwing things out that you can use again, try to use them again in some other fashion. And that way you have to use less resources as well. And if it's possible to recycle it, do that instead of throwing it in the trash. And that way we don't waste the resources that have already been taken from the planet. Now, this is important for a lot of reasons. It's important because it maintains the jobs, the health and well-being of people, the security of the future of our food, and the ability of us to accept each other. Because there's a lot of conflict among people that care about the planet and people that don't. So this is an important topic for all those reasons. And you might not think that jobs matter, in fact, there's a lot that's why the conversation always goes into. You got to save the economy. You got to save the jobs. The environment doesn't matter that much. But it does. It does matter for the jobs because the quantity and available resources that we get from the environment, the ecosystem services that we get from it, will eventually feed back into the well-being of people and in the ability to maintain an economy, right? Even from as basic as tourism, which relies on it, will completely fall apart if it wasn't for the environment. But it's way more than that. So there's also issues of economic issues, though. Do we keep growing our economy? Do we keep a resilient economy? Do we keep things affordable? Do we give enough energy for everybody? How do we actually make enough luxuries and things that people want to have of desired products? How do we balance all of that? Balancing the needs of the economy, the needs of the people, and the needs of the environment is a tricky process. But we got to have these conversations about how to do that with the thoughts of reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 R's. Because if we don't, and we worry too much about one versus the other, we're going to end up without any of them. And that's why it's so important. Another video on the ecosystems, and actually it was the biodiversity in humans video series. I talk about at length about why it's so important to be careful, because the things that we need from the environment are so important that if we aren't careful about being sustainable, we're going to compromise our future. So when it comes to sustainable use, we got to remember the idea of renewable versus non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are those which are non-renewable resources, I got confused for a second there, are resources which are finite. That means they're going to run out. They're going to get consumed, and if they can even be replenished, they cannot possibly be replenished in the amount of time of a human lifetime. It can take hundreds of thousands to millions of years to do that. So fossil fuels is a good example of that. Can you make more petroleum? Sure. But the process that made it took millions of years. So that's going to take a very long time. So that's kind of like the idea for a non-renewable resource. All right. Then you have renewable resources, which are those that can be replenished. And if done so manageably over long periods of time, you can maintain it for the future. But with care. Think about water, for example. It is renewable, but in the sense that the water cycle will keep recycling and cleaning the water, but it's not necessarily going to bring water to where you are. It might rain somewhere else, right? And so it's renewable to an extent. And if you use way too much, way faster than the cycle completes itself, then it's going to be a problem. So renewable resources are renewable, but you have to be careful not to use it too much. All right. And then you have inexhaustible resources, which are those that there's no way it's going to run out. We're not going to run out of wind. We're not going to run out of sunlight. We're not going to run out of ocean anytime soon. And we're not going to run out of tides anytime soon. So those are examples of things that we can use as much as we want, because there's as much of it as we need. Right. Now, do notice that, like I said, even renewable resources may become exhausted, right? Used up if we go use them too fast, which is why, again, the idea of sustainability is you have to use it in a way you can make sure there's enough left for tomorrow. So here's some examples of some resources that we get from our planet and whether they're renewable or not and how we use them. So groundwater is definitely renewable, even though it's a slow process because the water cycle doesn't go like this. And the primary use, believe it or not, is for agricultural purposes. I would say even more than half of the water that we use, and that's probably an understatement, is used for agriculture. In fact, I live in Colorado, and the river, Colorado River, that the state is named after, actually goes all the, I don't know if the state is named after, or if the river is named after the state, whichever way it is, it never gets to the ocean, because by the time it gets to California, it gets used up so much that it no longer hits the ocean. So that just gives you an idea of how much water is used for agricultural purposes. Second to that, we use a lot of water in industrial fabrication of things that we do. Almost everything that gets produced needs water in the process. Then, believe it or not, the next one is sewage. We need water to just get rid of waste. And that pollutes the water. And the process of cleaning it in natural ecosystems takes a while. And we are destroying ecosystems, so that doesn't help that either. Then we have water for hygiene purposes, showers, keeping things clean. And finally, for drinking. That's where we need it for the least. So our society uses it for the other reasons a lot more than the other ones. In your house, you probably waste more water flushing your toilet than you do taking a shower or ever drinking or cooking. All right. So that just gives you an idea. And the stuff that you buy and put in your house probably used up way more water than that. And the food that you eat in this production produce way more water than you ever will. So most of the impact you have is to the food that you eat, because that's the water for agriculture. We also use metal ores, right? We mine them from the ground, and we use that to do all kinds of things, cans, steel, aluminum foil, electrical circuits, vehicles, transportation, construction. All of these things are done with metals. And there's a lot of metals to mine on the planet. A lot of them are abundant, but not. They're considered non-renewable because after they get used up, unless you recycle them from the landfill, you're not going to find more after you mine it all. Right now, there's still tons of metals. There are some which are rarer than others, but they are not considered renewable. So that's why it's so important to be careful about reuse, reduce, and recycle. Petroleum is it says renewable. That is definitely wrong. I'm going to get a marker and fix that. I don't know why it says petroleum is renewable. That's not good. But so this right here is wrong. It's supposed to say non-renewable. I must have done a typo when I was preparing the presentation. So it's renewable over millions of years, right? But not over a human lifetime. So non-renewable petroleum. And that's because it takes a very, very long time. All right, there you go. I had to pause the video, but I fixed it because it bothered me. So we use petroleum for a lot of things, though. We use it to make plastic. Imagine once the oil runs out, what are we going to do without plastic? So many things made out of plastic. We're going to have to use glass and metal a lot more when that happens. And we think there's enough petroleum left here to last at the current rate of consumption for at least maybe another century. But a century from now, if we don't solve this problem, we're going to be out of plastic. But that's probably a good thing. We use plastic so much that it's all over the planet. Plastic waste is literally in the ocean as micro tiny pieces that fish eat, and then we eat, and then it goes to the water. And then our bodies literally have plastic inside because of it. So I'm fine with not having plastic in life anymore. I try to use plastic as little as possible. We also use oil for energy itself. There's oil power plants. And then we also make gas for cars out of that. And there's a lot of other applications as well, especially chemical and medicinal applications of that. So, but anyways, it is possible, by the way, to synthesize plastic and other kinds of materials that are like the materials we get from petroleum. After all, petroleum comes from life. So it's possible to synthesize that, but it's a lot more time-consuming and energy-consuming to do so than just use the oil. Petroleum is a very efficient energy source, and that's why we keep using it. There's a lot of it left, but not enough for 2 or 3 generations to live off of. So we're going to have to learn new ways of doing things. We certainly already know how to deal with the energy piece. There's lots of other types of energy, but I'll talk about that in the next video. But the plastic piece is interesting. And there is synthetic plastic, but it's very, very complicated to create it. So we have to make it cheaper. They also have air. Air is a resource, renewable. We obviously use that for breathing. We use wood for home heat and for construction purposes. We use minerals and rocks and elements that we mine for construction and for decoration, like marble is a great example of that. Marble countertops, marble statues, right? We use the soil which is renewable for agriculture. And by the way, wood and soil are renewable because you can plant trees in again. And the soil is renewable because over long periods of time, erosion and decomposition, the soil can be enriched again, even if it wasn't. But it is slow, like water, because the processes of material cycling can take a very long time. And that's why it's so important to preserve the soil and not overuse it and do crop rotation and things like that. Because if you don't, then you're going to consume the soil and then not have it anymore. And adding fertilizers is not the solution either, because runoff causes problems for ecosystems as the extra fertilizer runs into waterways and causes all kinds of destabilization to natural ecosystems. So we have to just take care of the soil that we have because of that. And of course, minerals like metals, ores, are non-renewable in the sense that once we actually mine them, they're going to be in landfills at some point. So we got to make sure that it's not like the earth has an infinite amount of these elements. Sunlight is inexhaustible. There's no way we're going to run out of it, at least not for the next 4 billion years, until the sun starts to expand and becomes a red giant and consumes the entire earth. So it's only going to stop being a problem once there's no more earth. And of course, that powers life, that you can use it for solar power. All the climate and weather on this planet is powered by it. So it's a huge, important thing that we use. And of course, the availability of that, though, varies across seasons and locations of the planet because the equator gets more sunlight than the poles do. And then who gets more sunlight depends on the time of the year because the earth is tilted. There's the seasons, right? So that's a resource that varies across the year to some extent. And then animals and plants are renewable because, they grow and they reproduce. But of course, like any other renewable resource, if we overuse it, we're going to make them go extinct, and then we're not going to have them anymore but we use them for food, for fibers, and for recreation and appreciation, and many other ecological services that that life provides. And you can see that on a different series on humans and biodiversity, or ecological diversity series that we talk about that there. All right, so here's a picture again of all of these resources. And the cool thing about this one is that if you pause and scan the actual QR codes, it will take you to a longer explanation about each type of these energy sources, which is what we're going to actually be focusing the next video on. So I will see you guys there.